What's up, guys? Welcome to the Comeback Athlete Podcast. I'm Blake, and I'm going to be talking today through a nutritional series on our three big macros. Okay, fats, carbs, and proteins. Today, we're going to talk about the topic that we've been covering in our newsletter all of last week and part of this week, and that is, do carbs make you fat? And spoiler alert, they do not. All right, so I want to put a lot of the myths to rest in this podcast. I want to have a little fun and just help you out. So here's the topics we're going to hit today in the podcast in order. We're going to talk a little bit about what carbs are. I'm going to try to keep it as simple for a fifth grader to understand. The difference between simple and complex carbs so that you can kind of educate yourself on what's best for you, when to utilize what, and what the differences are. And then why your body wants and needs carbs, okay? How the timing of carbohydrates can be beneficial. And then lastly, I'm going to give some generic categories for where I would start with carbohydrates in your diet. So I'm going to not prescribe, but I'm going to give some general starting points on these three categories. One being a weight loss or a body composition client. B being a client that is a performance client, so someone who's trying to compete in sport. And then lastly, I wanted to help out with giving just a general health, how many carbohydrates should I be getting? So those three categories. All right, let's dive in. So forever, I grew up kind of in the air in my early fitness, so mid-20s to mid-30s, I would say, where carbohydrates were demonized, right? Most of the big diets in that time frame were the zone diet or the paleo diet, or in the last 5 years, the keto diet. So in all those diets, right, there's a low intake of carbohydrates. Now, to be fair to those diets, they don't prescribe macros per se, but they do remove a lot of carbohydrates, okay? For instance, in paleo, like you're not allowed to have hardly any dairy or lactate. So lactose is a carbohydrate, right? And then you have your fructose, which is fruit. That is something we'll cover in a minute, but those two are different. In paleo, you can have fructose, you can have fruit. They don't want you to have too much, right? Because again, sugars, too much glucose. There was some early research that thought, man, this is what's causing all the diabetes. This is what's causing people to get fat in the Western world. And now we really know from more extensive research that really what makes you fat is just overeating and undermoving. So it's not so much about the foods. That being said, let's be fair to the people who are fearful of carbohydrates, where that fear comes from. Often carbohydrates are extremely tasty. They're really good. Our body craves them, which we'll talk about a little bit more. And they have a high shelf life, which means you don't have to really make them. You can grow into a grocery store, and most carbs you can kind of consume on the way out into the car, right? They are easy to prep, where protein, like you have to cook most of the time, right? It's not as easy to go cook a chicken and then eat it, right? You have to put some effort into that. But if you grab a bag of potato chips, much easier. If you grab a loaf of bread, much easier, right? So most processed things have high carbohydrates in them, and the most tasty things, I think, like of a pizza, are high carbs and high fat. So it's going to be high calorie and high palatability, meaning like very tasty, and I want to have that. That's where it comes into play. But at the end of the day, it's all about overconsumption, right? So I want to lay that to rest. So let's talk a little bit about what carbs are. All right. Carbs simply are energy that come into the body. So you have your fats, you have your carbs, and you have your protein. They're all three very important to us, right? Proteins are the building blocks. They're going to help our body recover from muscle tearing. They're going to help our hair grow back, our fingernails, skin, things like that is where protein is absorbed in the body and utilized. Can protein be an energy source? Technically it can, but we'll talk a little bit about why that's a bad idea. And it's the last resort of what the body actually wants to use for energy. The first one would be carbs. It's the most optimal. Our body runs the most smooth on this. Our brain functions the best on this. I know there are some people who are in the high fat camp that would actually disagree with me. And there are some people who adapt to a more ketosis style of energy that they do have fine brain cognition and are able to perform well in whatever job or study or things that they're trying to get done. But as far as research goes, optimization really is that we have enough glucose in our body that we can perform well. And glucose is taken from carbs and is the sugar that our body utilizes to actually perform. So walking, training, high brain function for the nervous system. So what happens is we have what's called glucose, and our body loves to use that throughout the day. If we run out of that, our body's really smart and sophisticated, and it stores more sugars in what's called glycogen. And glycogen is stored in our muscle tissue and in our liver. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But what you need to know is that our body likes carbs so much and glucose and wants to operate on it that not only is it the first thing it wants to use, but when we run out, we actually store so we can utilize that, especially for surviving. So when our body's in a hardcore workout, it can't tell the difference between it being in a hard workout and like you're being chased by a lion and trying to survive, right? Our body reacts into a sympathetic nervous system, and it utilizes glucose to go into the bloodstream to be able to perform, to survive those tasks so that we can keep living. And when we run out, we have reserves. Now, the next question would be, well, what do we do if we run out of those reserves? Well, we'll get to that. But before we get to that, I want to talk about two categories of how I think of, not how I think, but how we talk about carbohydrates. And one would be simple carbs, all right? And one would be complex state carbs. And the way I like to simplify this is one is the fast processing use of carbohydrates. So it's the ones that get in our bloodstream and get utilized in the body quickly, and they're going to be more processed and more broken down. The complex carbs are going to be more like starches, rice, oats, potatoes, whole wheat bread, beans, things like that. Those are going to be higher in fiber, and they're going to be and they're going to be slower processed. Not as slow as fats. Fats are slower processed. There's more nutrients we're pulling out of it. There's more time to break it down in the gut and utilize it. So you have to think, I just ate an avocado, or let's say the avocado, and then let's say a banana. Okay, a banana is a simple carb, right? It's fructose. It's going to have a lot of sugar in it, good sugars. It's also going to have some good minerals, vitamins, things like that we can pull from. All right. That will be processed faster in the morning for me to go do my workout at 6 a.m. than, let's say, eating an avocado. Avocado is really not going to be utilized unless I give myself like 3-4 hours of digestion in that process. So where you can utilize simple carbs much faster within maybe an hour or two. Now, I'm not an expert on the digestive timing of foods, right? So I'm not trying to give you an exact timing. I'm trying to give you a simple example of what I'm trying to say is that if you're going to fuel for a workout, having a high fat diet right before is not usually going to help you very much because you can't process and break all those nutrients down and use them in time to be able to actually be beneficial. Simple carbs will help you with that. And that's why we try to use those for people who are training, especially for people who are training very intensely. So simple, fast, right? Think more processed sugars, sodas, fruits, even lactose, so like milk, will be more utilized in that. Complex will be slower, and the complex carbs are going to be things like starches and fibers. All right. So why does our body love carbohydrates? And where does it come from and for us to be able to use? So like I talked to you earlier about, our body wants to use this so that we don't become sluggish, right? So that we don't become foggy headed. A lot of people who don't get enough sugar. I remember when I did a bodybuilding competition a couple of years ago, I was on hardly any carbohydrates. I was on an extremely, extremely high protein diet. And it's not healthy. We'll talk a little bit about that and I'll give a good example of an extreme version of that. Right. But I could actually tell like my brain was not functioning as well. People I worked around could see that I was slower, that my my cognition was just off. That's because when our glucose levels drop, our body goes into a place of slowing everything down and on purpose so that you can survive, right? It's like if we know we're not getting enough energy coming in, our body knows to slow down to match that for survival purposes. And that even means less optimization of thinking, right? Because cognition actually requires energy. Um, it creates more moodiness. It creates, that's why you have sugar cravings usually when you get like this. Think of also just really, really anxious. I remember when I was getting my master's degree, every time we would have finals or papers that were due, I would just crave pretzels, and then I would also crave Sour Patch Kids. And I never understood it until I started kind of researching and diving into the science behind why my body would crave those things. Now, my body can't determine the difference between mental stress and physical stress, but that's a whole nother podcast. So we won't dive into that too much. But what you need to know is that when those signals of stress come along, carb consumption goes up because the higher the stress, the more the body wants carbohydrates. Now you have to, and I have to distinguish if that's really an energy output thing, or if it's just that we're having a lot of stress hormonal responses that are signaling the brain, which is creating also cravings for us to replenish what we think we need. Okay. So there's a real difference between our hormones will respond, but how our body actually burns energy will not respond to mental stressors versus actual physical stressors. They're different. That being said, without going down that road too much, our body is constantly trying to have a balance of, do we have enough glucose, sugar in our body that we can, one, A, store in glycogen, livers and muscle tissue, and B, have enough to kind of function optimally throughout the day. So when we don't, we get those cravings. And when we avoid those cravings and we stay double down and we're trying to keep a diet with low carbohydrates, it is not uncommon to have the sluggishness, foggy minded, moody, crave sugar appetites or emotions. So that's part of it. And so it's really important, not only for if you want to build muscle to have carbohydrates in your diet, for recovery, but also just keeping hormones balanced. And we're going to talk more about that in a second. But what happens if you do run out of glucose, right? I paused on that earlier, but let's say like we utilize all our glucose, we're out, we're working out, and or we won't use that. Let's use an extreme example. So the story of the explorers in Antarctica who lived on rabbits, right? So they're exploring, they're out, they're walking, they're hiking, they're moving around, and the only thing they have to eat is rabbits that they brought that they could shoot and kill and hunt, or they wouldn't hunt them, but have them. And they were extremely lean, right? Rabbit meat is extremely lean, so there's hardly any fat. So there's no carbs, there's high protein because it's a very, very lean animal, and there's very low fat. Well, what happened was they actually all died. And so there's this rabbit diet story or rabbit starvation where all you're eating is protein. The body is really smart. It will, when it runs out of glucose, runs out of sugar, glucose, and then runs out of glycogen, the storage of that. What happens is then you will actually switch over to burning fats, right? And our body's smart, wants to do that. But when we run out of fat storage to pull from, right, our body could even turn protein into energy, but only for a limited amount of time before our hormones start shutting down and things start get really, really, really gnarly. So you want to avoid that. That's an extreme story, but it's a good one that kind of captures what I'm trying to say in that our body will survive, but the question is what's most optimal, and then what's educating, right? No good or bad food, right? Fats aren't bad. Candy is essentially not bad. Carbs are not bad. That's not like a moral thing. What we're looking at food is saying, what do I need to have in my diet for the goals that I have for my health and what I want to do with my body? And that's where you really want to go with that. So a lot of times people demonize something because they had a great relationship to losing weight when they went low carb, but I'm going to explain what really is going on there. But before we do that, let's talk about how carbs really do help you recover with hormonal health and why that is so important. And when we starve ourselves, I see this particularly in middle-aged women I've worked with that like are going through, they kind of grew up on the same diets that I grew up on, which were paleo, zone, keto, Atkins, and you're just low carbohydrate and you're really, really trying hard to stay away from those and then eat only salads and stuff like that. What happens is they go through that. It worked in their 20s, but now you've had 3 kids. You're trying to run everybody around town. You're also trying to work. You're also trying to be an awesome wife, and you're trying to have friends and relationships. And life is extremely stressful and busy trying to keep up with all of those things. What typically happens at that point is your body's not responding like it used to because stress is higher than it used to, right? So people are like, "Oh, I'm getting old." It's like, it's not, you are, but at the same time, it's really not an age thing. It's really a stress output. Like when you were 22 and you stayed out late and you partied and you overate, you relaxed the next day, bounced back, and the only real things you had to worry about was you and your social life. Now you have 3 little ones to worry about. You're trying to make sure you and your husband are on the same page, or vice versa, you and your wife, whatever it is. And you're trying to figure out like how to manage all these relationships, all these responsibilities. And that in itself actually causes your body to have more cortisol elevation. So your body releases insulin, right, which helps shuttle nutrients into your muscles, essentially. Just keep it simple. That can get suppressed when cortisol keeps going up, right? And that's not always a bad thing. We want that to be suppressed at times. So cortisol is doing a good thing. But when that happens all the time, right, that can be a bad thing. And so what helps suppress cortisol stress hormones is actually having more carbohydrates in our diet. So this is why we say the higher the stress, right, in your life, usually the higher you want carbohydrates. So if I'm just in layman's terms, if I'm training for a marathon, right, that's a high stressed physical training. I mean, you're putting a lot of miles on your body. You are putting a lot of time into your training, that a lot of energy expenditure, a lot of recovery needs to take place. So when that happens, you want to optimize recovery and fuel your body well to continue to perform well. You have to have high carbohydrates. If you go low carb and you're doing a marathon, can people do that? I'm sure. I'm sure there are some people out there, but optimization for the general population, this is not a good idea. So there's always this thing. So when there's something a lot of people don't know, it's that carbs actually help you recover more than you think. And so another big one that I'm really big on is like thyroid support, like there's sex hormones and thyroid, but it's super important to long-term health, especially for women, that you also are getting enough carbs. So in particular, like a lot of women that I know that are high stress, I'll actually tell them first thing in the morning to have that, because having that will actually start shutting off the cortisol level. So cortisol starts to climb in the morning, right? As melatonin goes down, cortisol goes up. And that is not as bad of a thing in men, right, for hormonal health. But for women, it can be, especially if you have constant cortisol spikes throughout the day, meaning that you got a lot of, it's hard to know that for sure, but let's just say in general, we're speaking of someone who's a high stress person, has a lot of things going on throughout the day that cause that, and it causes more anxiety. That person should have a little bit of carbs in the morning for sure at breakfast. They should not just do a fat protein diet on that. All right. Also at night, this is extremely important for hormonal health. I just went through this recently. So if you're struggling with sleep, right, January and February, I had a hard time sleeping, high anxiety, high cortisol responses, right? A lot of my glucose levels were way too high. I had too much protein in my diet. And so because of that, my sleep was getting jacked up. So one of the things I did to help optimize myself was I saved a lot of my carbohydrates for the end of the day. The reason for that is that it actually helps block off cortisol. It helps serotonin levels get boosted, which helps melatonin naturally kick on, which allows your body to relax and get into a more of a parasympathetic state. Cortisol comes down, melatonin goes up. It allows us to kind of rest. All right. So those are kind of like the simplest ways of explaining it. But a couple key rules there for timing with carbohydrates is, the higher the stress, more carbs. So both for performance And also think like the sick person, right? Sick people, right? If you just had the flu, right, or a cold, it's like the brat diet, right, which is all carbs, bananas, rice. I forget the other ones. I should know that, but I don't. Um, but they're all carbohydrates because it's that comfort food. It's that food that allows your body to relax and restore, and it's that body goes, like we're having good energy come back in. So that's really important. So the higher stress, higher carbs, right? Plan your carbohydrates around your workouts. So right before you want to have simple carbs, right after, right, you can have a little more starchy carbs, and then at night you can have a mixture of both. I would suggest if you are a general, health client, or you're trying to lose weight or body composition change, stay further away from simple carbohydrates, right? They're easier to eat and not realize how many calories you're taking in. They have a high, um, you know, palatable, very tasty kind of texture to them. So that makes you want to eat more of them. It makes it more challenging. So it's better to stick with more starchy carbohydrates. They'll fill you up more. They're lower calorie and they have less of that temptation to want to eat too much. So let's think of how many carbs I want to get. Okay. And so I told you in the beginning of this, I kind of break it down into 3 different types of clients: the weight loss body comp client, the performance client, and then the general health client. And so simply put, I would say for the weight loss body comp client, I would start anywhere from zero point 0.7 to 1 gram of carbs per pound of body weight. Okay. So we're looking at like roughly like 20 to 30% of your diet would be in there. I always like to ask the client when I'm individualizing this for them and trying to give them prescription, like the diet that you're most likely to follow is one that you are going to adhere to, is one that you will like. And so if you like fatty foods, avocados, juice, walnuts, things like that, then I would say we can even lower your carbohydrates just a tad more if that fits in, because at the end of the day, weight loss and body composition is going to have a lot to do with calories in, calories out. Body composition a little bit more focused on making sure your macros are dialed in, but that's another conversation. Weight loss is going to be making sure you're not losing muscle, so you're eating enough protein and enough carbohydrates to support that, but that you're in a caloric deficit. Okay. If you like carbs, which most of my clients that I work with do, then you can have a little bit more. That's why I give that range. Okay. If you're a performance client, you're gonna have a lot more. So this is the athlete, this is the person who's training for a particular competition, for sport, right? I would start around 1.5 at the low end and probably get some people that are like high rocks or CrossFit / endurance athletes like triathlon up around 2.5. All right. Expect to put a little bit of puffiness on, right? You're going to hold a little bit more water weight. You're probably going to put a little bit of fat tissue on, but you're going to be able to perform well, right? You cannot be a great athlete and not have a little bit of body fat. That's just comes with the territory. However, you do get to work out so much that typically that's not an issue, because you're moving more, you're getting stronger, you're breaking down muscle tissue and recovering. So it actually winds up benefiting most people. A lot of times, endurance athletes I work with aren't eating enough carbohydrates. And when I get them to eat more, their body composition actually gets better. They actually become leaner. But it's muscle and their body is feeling like they can actually burn fat and continue to perform well. And then for the general health client, I go kind of in the middle of those two. I start around 1 to 1.5 grams per pound of body weight. And I try to keep these people more in the high quality foods, eat more carbs throughout the day. I would still plan a good amount of your carbs around your workout, pre, post. And then I like everybody having some carbs before bed, because I think it just helps most people sleep well, because I find that most people are pretty stressed. So I hope this was helpful. I hope I laid to rest some of the carbohydrates myths. Typically, like I said earlier, I explained like what really goes on is Most people did a low carb diet. They had this experience, this honeymoon experience of, hey, I lost all this weight. And what it really was they cut carbs out. They lost some water weight because there's less, water. Carbohydrate is going to hold water weight, right? That's actually a good thing for most of us. You'll lose essentially when you drop your carbs like 4 pounds in the first week. It's very normal for a lot of people if you change up your macros like that. So some of that's fool's gold. Like it's not necessarily body fat that you're losing. Um, and what happens is like you have a negative association with carbs, but you really were just eating less. You were eating more whole foods, so you felt better because you're getting more, minerals and vitamins and the things that your body actually needed. So you felt more satiated because you're eating whole foods, while at the same time you really were eating in a deficit because the foods you were eating before had way more calories and they did not fill you up, and they also did not prescribe or give you the minerals and vitamins you needed. So your body had more craving to eat more, thinking it would get those minerals and vitamins out of the food that you had. So I know that sounds a little complicated, but to make it more simple, your body was looking for more vitamins. It was looking for more satiation in the food. And what you had in front of you was more processed and less satiating. So you ate too much of it. When you stopped doing that because you got on a diet that had more whole foods in it, you actually ate less while feeling more full, and you lost weight because of that. That wasn't because carbs are bad. That was because you ate less. All right. Now, and that's just true. Like I bet if we could go back and record all of your food on those certain diets that you had great success with, that's what happened. Now, people, because I've had the same experience with people, and I know I'm rambling and haven't landed the plane here yet, but like you'll hear people talk about, man, I did keto, it was great for me. And they're like, I did keto and I didn't lose any weight. Well, what's the difference? Was it the diet of like the rules of you can only eat mostly fats and hardly any carbs and mostly protein? No, it was that some people overate and some people did not, right? Some people understood how many calories they needed and some people did not. And so at the end of the day, that really is it. For most people who are general health clients who want to just get to a decent body with fat, eating, you don't have to count calories, just eating more good whole foods, getting a variety of carbs, fats, and proteins in your diet will really usually help lean your body out and stay in a good place where you feel healthy and fit and have energy to want to move more. So that's hopefully a great place to land and end today. I think I covered everything we said we would earlier. We're going to continue this series for the next couple weeks. So I'll cover fats in the next one and then proteins in the last one. And then I'll probably do one on hydration here. So hope you guys enjoyed this. Have a great day. And if you like us, please subscribe and also share and leave us a review. Thank you.